What is the p53 gene?
The p53 protein interferes with tumor growth and is 53 kilodaltons in length. It is found in increased amounts in cells that have undergone treatment, such as radiation, that damages DNA. The gene that codes for this tumor suppressor is known as the p53 gene. Mutations that inactivate this gene are found in the majority of all human tumors.
What was the first professional organization of physiologists?
The first organization of physiologists was the Physiological Society, founded in 1876 in England. In 1878 the Journal of Physiology began publication as the first journal dedicated to reporting results of research in physiology. The American counterpart, the American Physiological Society, was founded in 1887. The American Physiological Society's sponsored publication, the American Journal of Physiology, began in 1898.
What is a MVP?
The MVP, minimum viable population size, is the smallest number of individuals needed to perpetuate a population, subpopulation, or species. PVAs, population viability analyses, are especially helpful in predicting the MVP.
What is ELSI as it pertains to the Human Genome Project?
ELSI is a specific aspect of the Human Genome Project that deals with the ethical, legal, and social, issues, arising from increasing availability of genetic information. About 3 to 5% of the budget of the HGP is devoted to ELSI. It represents the largest bioethics study in the world.
Is there movement among the molecules that comprise a cell membrane?
A cell membrane is mainly composed of phospholipids and proteins, which are two types of bioorganic molecules. Within the membrane, phospholipids are able to move laterally. Depending on temperature and fatty acid composition, phospholipids generally move faster than proteins. The proteins drift about slowly in a body of lipids, much like icebergs in an ocean. Proteins are able to change shape, also known as conformation. For example, carrier proteins are able to bind specific molecules, such as glucose, in order to provide transportation for the molecule. Once glucose is attached to the carrier protein, the protein changes shape and ferries the glucose inside of the cell.
What are different ways of defining the term species?
A species may be defined in a number of ways. The biological species concept defines any two individuals that can breed and produce fertile offspring as belonging to the same species. This would mean that lions and tigers would be considered the same species. As they can produce hybrid offspring, there is at least one case of a tigon. The offspring of a male tiger and a female lion, producing offspring after an unplanned mating with a tiger. Other concepts include the phylogenetic species concept, which bases species determination on the shared evolutionary history of the populations in question.
What are the general characteristics of biomes?
A biome is one of the world's prominent ecosystems, characterized by both vegetation and organisms particularly adapted to that environment.
What is the Red Queen hypothesis?
This hypothesis, also called the law of constant extinction, is named after the Red Queen in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, who said, "Now here. You see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." The idea is that an evolutionary advance by one species represents a deterioration of the environment for all remaining species. This places pressure on those species to advance just to keep up.
Other than DNA, what else can nucleotides be used for?
Nucleotides can also act as messengers or modulators. For example, the nucleotide adenosine, adenine plus ribose without the phosphate, may be the most important type of immunomodulator, a compound that increases or decreases neuronal activity. Adenosine is used clinically to stop the heart when it is beating erratically. The natural heart pacemaker cells then return the heart to its normal rhythm. Adenosine is also thought to play a role in feelings of fatigue or tiredness. Neuroscientists currently theorize that caffeine works to maintain alertness by interfering with the reception of adenosine on the cell surface.
Other differences are, how does a mastodon differ from a mammoth?
Although the words are sometimes used interchangeably, the mammoth and the mastodon were two different species. The mastodon seems to have appeared first, and a side branch may have led to the mammoth. The mastodon lived in Africa, Europe, Asia, and North and South America. It appears in the Oligocene era, 25 to 38 million years ago, and survived until less than 1 million years ago. It stood a maximum of 10 feet 3 meters tall and was covered with dense, woolly hair. Its tusks were straightforward and nearly parallel to each other. The mammoth evolved less than 2 million years ago and died out about 10,000 years ago. It lived in North America, Europe, and Asia. Like the mastodon, the mammoth was covered with dense, woolly hair, with a long, coarse layer of outer hair to protect it from the cold. It was somewhat larger than the mastodon, standing 9 to 15 feet, 2.7 to 4.5 m. The mammoth's tusks tended to spiral outward, then up. The gradual warming of the Earth's climate and the change in environment were probably primary factors in the mammoth's extinction. But early man killed many 274 mammoths as well, perhaps hastening the process.
What is germline therapy?
Germline therapy involves gene alteration within the gametes, eggs or sperm, of an organism. Alterations in gamete genes transfer the gene to all cells in the next generation. As a result, all members of future generations will be affected.
How do statin drugs affect cell function?
Statins are a group of drugs that work to lower cholesterol levels, particularly the bad cholesterol, low-density lipoprotein known as LDL. The drugs work in two ways. 1. They block an enzyme that is needed for cholesterol production. 2. They increase LDL membrane receptors in the liver. Cholesterol can only get into cells by binding to specific receptors that remove the LDL from blood. The extra receptors that statins create help decrease the cholesterol levels. As Americans become more aware that high cholesterol is a major risk factor for heart disease, statins are becoming increasingly popular.
What are the major groups of segmented worms?
Members of the phylum Annelida, the segmented worms, have bilateral symmetry and a tubular body that may have 100 to 175 ring-like segments. The three classes of segmented worms are, 1. Polychaeta, the sandworms and tube worms. 2. Oligochaeta, the earthworms, and 3. Hirudinea, the leeches.
What cell structures are unique to animal cells?
Lysosomes and centrioles are found only in animal cells.
How do genes control cancer cells?
In normal cells, there are two types of genes that are important. in determining whether or not cancerous tissue can form. These genes control the production of proteins that affect the cell cycle. Proto-oncogenes are DNA sequences that promote normal cell division. By mutation, these genes may be converted into oncogenes, which promote the overproduction of cells. Another class of genes, known as tumor suppressor genes, prevents excess reproduction of cells. Mutation in these genes can also allow cells to become cancerous.
History.
The identification of the remains of the victims from the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in New York City has comprised the largest and most difficult DNA identification to date. After 1.6 million tons of debris were removed from the site of the attacks on the World Trade Center, only 239 intact bodies, out of 2,795, were found, along with about 20,000 pieces of human remains. In order to match DNA profiles to the bodies, personal items such as razor blades, combs, and toothbrushes were collected from the victims' homes. When possible, cheek swabs were taken from the victims' family members for comparison with remains. The identification process was still ongoing as of mid-2004.
What is the structure of stems of seed plants?
There are three basic types of organization in the primary structure of stems. 1. The vascular system may appear as a continuous hollow cylinder around the pith. 2. Discrete vascular bundles may form a single ring around the pith. Or 3. The vascular bundles may appear scattered throughout the ground tissue.
What is the pH scale?
The pH scale is the measurement of the H and concentration, hydrogen ions, in an aqueous solution. It is used to measure the acidity or alkalinity of a solution. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. A neutral solution has a pH of 7, a solution with a pH greater than 7 is basic or alkaline, and a solution with a pH less than 7 is acidic. The lower the pH, the more acidic the solution. As the pH scale is logarithmic, each whole number drop on the scale represents a tenfold increase in acidity, meaning the concentration of H and increases tenfold.
What is meant by the phrase pecking order?
Pecking order refers to the dominance hierarchy, i.e., relative ranking, of animals within the same species. It has been adapted in business to refer to one's position within the company.
Is there a gay gene?
Homosexuality has a strong genetic component. One study found that among 56 pairs of monozygotic male twins, concordance simultaneous incidence for homosexuality was 52%, while it was only 22% for fraternal dizygotic twins and 11% for unrelated adopted brothers. This indicates that the closer two males are genetically, the more likely they are to have the same sexual orientation. Several studies have pointed to a likely location for male homosexuality traits at the tip of the X chromosome. It should be noted that not all males with this sequence identified themselves as homosexual. And so it seems likely that a variety of factors, environmental and genetic, may have roles in determining sexual orientation. So far, there are no correlate statistics for female homosexuality.
Do pine trees keep their needles forever?
Pine needles occur in groups, called fascicles, of 2 to 5 needles. A few species have only one needle per fascicle, while others have as many as 8. Regardless of the number of needles, a fascicle forms a cylinder of short shoots that are surrounded at their base by small, scale-like leaves that usually fall off after 1 year of growth. The needle-bearing fascicles are also shed a few at a time, usually every 2 to 10 years. So that any pine tree, while appearing evergreen, has a complete change of needles every 5 years or less.
Are all genes in a genome used by an organism?
No. All genes are not used by an organism all the time. Since protein synthesis is an energy-intensive cellular process, proteins are not produced unless they are needed for a specific cell function. For example, before a human has reached adult height, cells are continually producing human growth hormone, a protein that encourages bone and muscle growth. However, at a certain age, which varies by individual, the gene will become dormant and will no longer produce growth hormone.
What is ADP?
ADP, adenosine triphosphate, is the universal energy currency of a cell. Its secret lies in its structure. ADP contains 3 negatively charged phosphate groups. When the bond between the outermost 2 phosphate groups is broken, ADP becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. This reaction releases 7.3 kcal/mol of ADP, which is a great deal of energy by cell standards.
Are viruses living organisms?
Viruses cannot grow or replicate on their own and are inert outside their living host cell. Once they enter a host cell, they become active. As such, they are between life and non-life and are not considered living organisms.
What is the difference between a gene and a chromosome?
The human genome contains 24 distinct, physically separate units called chromosomes. Arranged linearly along the chromosomes are tens of thousands of genes. The term gene refers to a particular part of a DNA molecule defined by a specific sequence of nucleotides. It is the specific sequence of the nitrogen bases that encodes a gene. The human genome contains about 3 billion base pairs, and the length of genes varies widely.
What is the relationship between bacteria and temperature?
All microorganisms have temperature ranges that determine growth. Overall, microorganisms are unique in their ability to exist and grow at temperatures ranging from 14 degrees Fahrenheit to 230 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 10 degrees Celsius to 110 degrees Celsius. Temperature restrictions are due to limitations in cell metabolism. A microorganism's maximum temperature is the highest temperature at which growth can occur. Minimum temperature is the lowest temperature at which growth can occur. A microorganism's optimum temperature is the temperature at which the growth rate is the fastest. The maximum, minimum, and optimum temperatures define the range of growth for each microorganism and are collectively referred to as the cardinal temperatures. Bacteria are divided into 4 groups on the basis of their cardinal temperatures for growth: psychrophiles, mesophils, thermophils, and extreme thermophils. The following chart lists the temperature ranges at which these groups can grow.
What is the heaviest invertebrate?
The giant clam, Tridacna maxima, is the heaviest invertebrate. It may weigh as much as 122 pounds 270 kilograms. The shells of this bivalve may be as long as 5 feet 1.5 meters.
What is biopreservation?
Biopreservation refers to the preservation and enhanced safety of food using biological materials. An example of this is nisin, a bacterial protein that can act as a broad-spectrum antibiotic. Nisin cannot be synthesized chemically. So the nisin-producing bacteria Lactobacillus must be used to generate the protein.
Why are carbohydrates a major part of the human diet?
Our cells have evolved in a manner that has made carbohydrates the human body's primary energy source. In fact, the entire metabolic system begins with glucose. While most of the cells in our bodies can adapt, at least temporarily, to using lipids and proteins as energy sources, our brain cells require glucose. This means that when blood glucose levels fall too low, the brain cells shut down and we faint. By fainting, the flow of blood and glucose to the brain is increased.
What purpose do the gills of mushrooms serve?
Gills, which can be present on the undersurface of a mushroom's cap, serve two main purposes. The first is to maximize the surface area on which spores are produced, allowing a very large number of spores to be produced. The second purpose is to help hold up the cap of the mushroom. Spores are produced in the basidia specialized cells that line the surface of the gills. It has been estimated that a mushroom with a cap that is 3 in 7.5 centimeters in diameter can produce as many as 40 million spores per hour.
What is coevolution?
Coevolution is a rare form of evolution. By definition, it requires that two species adapt to evolutionary changes occurring in each other. An example of this reciprocal adaptation would be the development of mutualistic relationships between plants and the insects that prey upon them. As the plant develops defenses, like the oils of species in the mustard family, the insects develop counter-weapons. Cabbage butterflies have metabolic adaptations that can safely break down these toxic compounds.
How many quills does a porcupine have?
For its defensive weapon, the average North American porcupine has about 30,000 quills or specialized hairs. Comparable in hardness and flexibility to slivers of celluloid and so sharply pointed they can penetrate any hide. The quills that do the most damage are the short ones that stud the porcupine's muscular tail. With a few lashes, the porcupine can send a rain of quills that have tiny scale-like barbs into the skin of its adversary. The quills work their way inward because of their barbs and the involuntary muscular action of the victim. Sometimes the quills can work themselves out, but other times the quills pierce vital organs, and the victim dies. Slow-footed and stocky, porcupines spend much of their time in the trees, using their formidable incisors to strip off bark and foliage for their food, and supplement their diets with fruits and grasses. Porcupines have a ravenous appetite for salt, as herbivores. Plant-eating animals, their diets have insufficient salt. So natural salt licks, animal bones left by carnivores, meat-eating animals. yellow pond lilies, and other items having a high salt content, including paints, plywood adhesives, and human clothing that bears traces of sweat, have a strong appeal to porcupines.
What is the importance of an external egg in reproduction?
Species that have an external egg usually produce a greater number of zygotes. Because mating between males and females is not required for successful reproduction. The external egg of most species has a leathery outer covering to prevent desiccation.
What are multifactorial traits?
Phenotypes that are the result of one or more environmental factors and at least two genes are called multifactorial traits. This designation reflects the many factors that may have a role in the physical manifestation of a gene sequence. There are many illnesses that are multifactorial, an example is favism, an inborn metabolic disorder with a predisposition to anemia. However, the anemia only develops when fava beans are eaten or the pollen is inhaled. The environmental factor.
How do cells respond to cellular signals?
In order to respond to a signal, a cell needs a receptor molecule that recognizes the signal. A cell's response to a specific signal varies according to the signal. Some signals are local signals, example, growth factors, while others act as distance signals, example hormones. There are two basic types of hormones. Those that bind to receptors on the cell surface and those whose receptors are found within cytoplasm. Both types cause the cellular machinery to change its activities.
What is the name of the early Jurassic mammal that is now extinct?
The fossil site of the mammal Hadrocodium wui was in Yunnan province, China. This newly described mammal is at least 195 million years old. The estimated weight of the whole mammal is about 0.07 oz. 2g. Its tiny skull was smaller than a human thumbnail.
What are some famous figures in history with genetic disorders?
One of the most common genetic connective tissue disorders is Marfan syndrome. People with Marfan syndrome are usually very tall, with skeletal malformation and loose joints. Abraham Lincoln, Paganini, and Rachmaninoff were believed to have Marfan syndrome because of their above-average height and loose joints. People with Marfan syndrome may excel in sports such as basketball or volleyball. Olympic volleyball star Flo Hyman died of a ruptured aorta as a result of Marfan's. King George III, 1738–1820, of Great Britain suffered from porphyria, a disorder inherited as a dominant trait that causes occasional attacks of pain and dementia.
What was one of the most famous criminal cases involving forensic botany?
Forensic botany is the identification of plants or plant products. This form of study can be used to produce evidence for legal trials. One of the first criminal cases to use forensic botany was the famous 1935 trial of Bruno Hauptmann, 1899–1936, who was accused, and later convicted, of kidnapping and murdering the son of Charles and Anne Morrow Lindbergh. The botanical evidence presented in the case centered on a homemade wooden ladder used during the kidnapping and left at the scene of the crime. After extensive investigation, the plant anatomist Arthur Kohler, 1885–1967, showed that parts of the ladder were made from wooden planks taken from Hauptmann's attic floor.
Can human cells grow outside the body?
Human cells can be cultured in vitro, a Latin term meaning outside the body. If the cells are given oxygen and appropriate nutrients. However, these cells usually pass through a limited number of cell divisions, about 50, before they begin to die.
What is an atom?
An atom is the smallest unit of an element, containing the unique chemical properties of that element. Atoms are very small. Several million atoms could fit in the period at the end of the sentence.
What is a macromolecule?
Macromolecules are literally giant polymers made from the chemical linkage of smaller units called monomers. To be considered a macromolecule, a molecule has to have a molecular weight greater than 1000 daltons. A dalton is a standard unit of measurement that refers to the mass of a proton. It can be used interchangeably with atomic mass unit, AMU.
Who coined the term chromatography?
The Russian-Italian biochemist Mikhail Semyonovich Tsvet, or Tsvet, 1872–1919, coined the term chromatography and published the first paper on the method in 1903. The term comes from the Greek words chroma, meaning color, and graphein, meaning writing or drawing.
How much of the human genome actually codes for genetic information?
Only about 5% of the human genome appears to code for genetic information.
How does an animal's energy budget affect its behavior?
Every animal has a finite amount of energy available for use in a unit of time. This energy usage is its metabolic rate, measured in calories or kilocalories, plus the energy required for life activities. The energy budget places limitations on an animal's behavior. For example, a lizard, which is an ectotherm, cold-blooded, uses less energy because it does not maintain a constant body temperature. Ectotherms such as amphibians and reptiles control body temperature by behavior. Endothermic, warm-blooded, animals, e.g., birds, mammals, have a higher energy budget, most of which is used to maintain internal body temperature. Thus, endotherms require more energy than ectotherms of a similar size, and so may spend a greater portion of their day searching for food. Other factors that influence energy requirements are age, sex, size, type of diet, activity level, hormonal balance, and time of day.
What is the first structure to emerge following germination?
The first structure to emerge following germination is the radicle or embryonic root. The radicle allows the developing seedling to become anchored in the soil and to absorb water. This first root, the primary root, develops branch roots called lateral roots. The lateral roots send out additional lateral roots, eventually creating the multi-branched root system.
How do diet drugs affect cell metabolism?
Diet drugs target the areas of the brain that control food intake and produce neurotransmitters. Drugs that attempt to control food intake are adrenergic. Their role is to enhance metabolism and increase the efficiency of calorie burning. The second type of drug targets the brain chemical serotonin. Serotonin is linked to appetite, particularly cravings for carbohydrates. Higher levels of serotonin lead to less cravings for carbohydrates. For example, the diet drug dexvenfluramine inhibits the removal of serotonin in the brain. However, there are side effects to the use of diet drugs, and there is insufficient data regarding the safety and effectiveness of their long-term use.
How are ants distinguished from termites?
Both insect orders ants, order Hymenoptera, and termites. Order Isoptera, have segmented bodies with multi-jointed legs. Listed below are some differences.
Why do cells die?
Cells die for a variety of reasons, many of which are not deliberate. For example, cells can starve to death, asphyxiate, or die from trauma. Cells that sustain some sort of damage, such as DNA alteration or viral infection, frequently undergo programmed cell death. This process eliminates cells with a potentially lethal mutation or limits the spread of the virus. Programmed cell death can also be a normal part of embryonic development. Frogs undergo cell death that results in the elimination of tissues, allowing a tadpole to morph into an adult frog.
What contributions did John and William Bartram make to botany?
John Bartram, 1699 to 1777, was the first American-born botanist. He and his son, William Bartram, 1739 to 1823, traveled throughout the American colonies observing the flora and fauna of the colonies. Although John Bartram never published his observations, he was considered the authority on American plants. In 1791 his son William 160 published his notes on American plants and animals as Bartram's Travels.
Can cells conduct electricity?
Yes. All living cells have membranes that allow them to maintain a difference in concentration of atoms located on the inside and outside of the cell. Some of these atoms are ions that have a charge. This ability to maintain an imbalance of ions is called cell membrane potential and is analogous to the electrical potential of a battery.
What are the characteristics of the protists?
Protists are a diverse group of organisms. All protists are eukaryotic. Many are unicellular, but they may be multicellular, multinucleate, or exhibit a colonial organization. Although most are microscopic, some are much larger, reaching lengths of nearly 200 feet 60 meters. In early, traditional taxonomic schemes, they were united on the basis of being neither plant nor animal nor fungus. Current evidence suggests that protists exhibit characteristics of the plant, animal, and fungi kingdoms.
Is there a chemistry to love?
Neurochemicals are released in the physical bodies of two people that are attracted to each other. So one can say that there is indeed a chemical reaction between two people. The neurochemicals involved are phenylethylamine, also found in chocolate, which speeds up the flow of information between nerve cells, dopamine, which makes us feel good, and norepinephrine, which makes the heart race.
Where does rain come from?
Solar energy drives winds that evaporate water from the surface of the oceans. The water vapor cools as it rises and then falls to the ground as rain. Snow, or some other form of precipitation. Rain is part of the hydrologic cycle, which describes dynamic changes in the aquatic environment.
What are some economically important angiosperms?
Angiosperms produce lumber, ornamental plants, and a variety of foods.
Is lactose intolerance a genetic disorder?
Lactose intolerance is due to reduced activity of the enzyme lactase. Lactase hydrolyzes the lactose of mammalian milk into the two monosaccharides glucose and galactose. Lactose intolerance is very common in adults, as expression of the lactase enzyme begins to decrease in humans at about 2 years of age. Estimates of lactose intolerance in the U.S. population vary. Congenital lactase deficiency is a rare autosomal recessive disorder and results in no lactase production. This is in contrast to childhood and adult onset lactase deficiency, which is common and is inherited in an autosomal dominant pattern.
What is the life cycle of a typical fungus such as the black bread mold, Rhizopus nigricans?
The life cycle of black bread mold, Rhizopus nigricans, is characteristic of the members of the phylum Zygomycota. This fungus has a period of sexual reproduction and a period of asexual reproduction that occurs more frequently. During sexual reproduction, there is a fusion of gametangia. The resulting zygosporangium forms a thick coat that awaits favorable conditions in order to conduct further development. When conditions are favorable, the zygosporangium germinates into a sporangium. During asexual reproduction, spores are produced in the sporangium and then dispersed.
How are carbohydrates classified?
Carbohydrates are classified in several ways. Monosaccharides, single unit sugars, are grouped by the number of carbon molecules they contain. Triose has 3, pentose has 5, and hexose has 6. Carbohydrates are also classified by their overall length. Monosaccharide, disaccharide, polysaccharide, or function. Examples of functional definitions are storage polysaccharides, glycogen and starch, which store energy, and structural polysaccharides. Cellulose and chitin, which provide support for organisms without a bony skeleton.
How do scientists differentiate between homology and analogy?
Scientists can determine whether a trait is homologous or analogous by comparing it in species thought to be of common origin and contrasting it to traits of unrelated species in similar habitats.
What is the difference between a fat and a lipid?
Lipids are bioorganic molecules that are hydrophobic. In other words, they do not mix with or dissolve in water. Among lipids there is a category known as fats. Each fat molecule is comprised of a glycerol, alcohol, molecule and at least one fatty acid, hydrocarbon chain with an acid group attached.
What is phylogeny?
Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a group of species. This history is often displayed as a phylogenetic tree, in which individual species or groups of species are listed at the end of the branches. The nexuses where branches join indicate common ancestors. Systematics is the area of biology devoted to the classification of organisms. Originally introduced by Carl Linnaeus. 1707 to 1778, who based his classification system on physical traits. Systematics now includes the similarities of DNA, RNA, and proteins across species as criteria for classification.
What is wood?
Wood is the accumulated secondary xylem of a plant. Generally, the wood used commercially is from plant stems rather than plant roots. Wood located near the center of a tree trunk is called hardwood. Its cells are infiltrated with gums and resins from the aging secondary xylem. Hardwood is often darker in color than wood nearer to the vascular cambium. Wood closer to the vascular cambium is called sapwood. It is actively involved in transporting water within the plant.
What are examples of courting behavior?
Male stickleback fish swim in a stereotypical manner as they court potential mates. Male bowerbirds build elaborate towers of vegetation to entice females. Female moths release pheromones that attract males from up to a mile away. Male African elephants use low-frequency sounds to find females who are sexually receptive. And, of course, male birds and frogs use vocalizations to attract mates.
What is biochemistry?
As a field of scientific study, chemistry may be divided into various subgroups. One major subgroup is organic chemistry, which refers to the study of carbon-based compounds, including carbohydrates and hydrocarbons such as methane and butane. Within the field of organic chemistry there is a discipline that focuses solely on the study of the organic molecules that are important to living organisms. This branch is known as biochemistry.
Why do animals play?
Many animals, mammals and some birds, particularly, have been observed at play during different stages of development. Although play would seem to be random, ethologists have described three patterns: 1. Social. For establishing relationships to other animals. 2. Exercise, for development of muscles. 3. Exploration of an object. All of these occur during the wrestling, chasing, and tumbling activities of the young of many species. Some juvenile play, such as lion cubs capturing mice, may be practiced for adult activities such as hunting.
Do both sides of DNA contain genes?
One strand of DNA contains the information that codes for genes, and it is called the antisense strand or non-coding strand. It is this strand that is transcribed into mRNA and is designated as the template strand. The other, complementary strand is called the coding strand, because it contains codons, or sense strand. Its sequence is identical to the mRNA strand, except for the substitution of U, uracil, for T, thymine.
How is sensory information transmitted to the central nervous system?
Sensory information is transmitted to the central nervous system through a process that includes stimulation, transduction, and transmission. A physical stimulus, example light or sound pressure, is converted into nerve cell electrical activity in a process called transduction. The electrical activity is then transmitted as action potentials to the central nervous system.
What are some important antifungal drugs and their mechanism of operation?
Many antifungal drugs work by interfering with the function or synthesis of ergosterol. Ergosterol is found in the cytoplasmic membrane of fungal cells but is not found in human cells. Some antifungal drugs interfere with fungus-specific structures and functions, such as the cell wall.
What are mycoplasmas?
Mycoplasmas are the smallest, free-living organisms, and the only bacteria that exist without a cell wall. Some mycoplasmas have sterols, a type of lipid-lacking fatty acids, in their plasma membranes, which provide the strength a membrane needs to maintain cellular integrity without a wall. Since mycoplasmas lack cell walls that provide shape and rigidity, they have no definitive forms and are pleomorphic. Mycoplasma pneumoniae causes a disease known as primary atypical pneumonia. PAP, a mild form of pneumonia confined to the lower respiratory tract. Because mycoplasmas do not have cell walls, penicillin is ineffective in stopping their growth. Tetracycline, which inhibits protein synthesis, is recommended as the antibiotic of choice for treatment of PAP.
What is the only American canine that can climb trees?
The gray fox, Urocyon cinerio argenteus, is the only American canine that can climb trees.
How does social deprivation affect animals?
The effect of a lack of parental care on the social development of young monkeys was studied by Harry Harlow, 1905 to 1981, and his colleagues beginning in the 1950s. In a now classic experiment, Harlow was able to show that the mother-infant bond was so important to young rhesus monkeys that the infants preferred a soft cuddly fake mother to a fake mother built from wire even if it had a nursing bottle attached. Depending on the age of the monkey and the duration of the treatment. Total isolation, isolation with fake mother, and so on. Monkeys in these studies later exhibited a range of behavioral deficits including rocking and swaying, poor maternal behavior, and a failure in understanding communication signals from other monkeys.
How long does it take the average spider to weave a complete web?
The average orb weaver spider takes 30 to 60 minutes to completely spin its web. These species of spiders, order Araneae, use silk to capture their food in a variety of ways, ranging from the simple tripwires used by large bird-eating spiders to the complicated and beautiful webs spun by orb spiders. Some species produce funnel-shaped webs, and other communities of spiders build communal webs. A completed web features several spokes leading from the initial structure. The number and nature of the spokes depend on the species. The spider replaces any damaged threads by gathering up the thread in front of it and producing a new one behind it. The orb web must be replaced every few days because it loses its stickiness and its ability to entrap food.
Which organism has the least number of chromosomes?
The organism with the least number of chromosomes is the male Australian ant, Myrmecia pilosula, with 1 chromosome per cell. Male ants are generally haploid, that is, they have half the number of normal chromosomes, while the female ant has 2 chromosomes per cell. Bacteria have 1 circular chromosome consisting of DNA and associated proteins.
How are cilia and flagella similar?
Cilia and flagella are the motile appendages of eukaryotic cells. They are thick, flexible structures that exhibit a beating motion and project from the surfaces of many cells. A cell having 1 or a small number of appendages can be identified having flagella. Singular, flagellum, if they are relatively long in proportion to the size of the cell. If the cell has many short appendages, they are called cilia, singular, cilium. Cilia and flagella have the same internal structure, but differ in their length. The number occurring per cell, and mode of beating. They are axon-emal in shape, formed by a main cylinder of tubules that are approximately 0.25 in diameter. The axoneme has a pattern of 9 plus 2 consisting of 9 outer doublets of tubules and 2 additional central microtubules, the central pair. Cilia are about 2 to 10 m long, while flagella are much longer, ranging from 1 m to several millimeters, although they are most 50 commonly 10 to 200. They are both intracellular structures, bound by an extension of the plasma membrane. Both cilia and flagella are used by cells to move through watery environments or to move materials across cell surfaces.
How does asexual reproduction differ from sexual reproduction?
Asexual reproduction produces offspring with the exact genetic material of the parent. Only one individual is needed to produce offspring via asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction produces offspring by the fusion of 2 gametes, haploid cells, to form 1 zygote, diploid cell. The male gamete is the sperm, and the female gamete is the egg.
What is the fastest snake on land?
The black mamba, Dendroaspis polylepis, a deadly poisonous African snake that can grow up to 13 feet 4 m in length, has been recorded reaching a speed of 7 miles per hour, 11 kilometers per hour. A particularly aggressive snake, it chases animals at high speeds. Holding the front of its body above the ground.
What is the relationship between probability and genetics?
Probability is a branch of mathematics used to predict the likelihood of an event occurring. It is also an important tool for understanding inheritance patterns of specific traits. There are two rules that are applied to genetic inheritance. 1. The rule of 388 multiplication is used when determining the probability of any two events happening simultaneously. For example, if the probability of having dimples is 1/4, and the probability of having a male child is 1/2, then the probability of having a boy with dimples is 1/4 x 1/2, or 1/8. 2. The rule of addition is used when determining the outcome of an event that can occur in two or more ways. For example, if we were to consider the probability of having a male child or of having a child with dimples, then the probability would be 1/2 plus 1/4, or 3/4. In other words, chances are 3 out of 4 that a given birth will produce a male child or a child with dimples.
What is programmed cell death?
Apoptosis, or programmed cell death, is a process by which cells deliberately destroy themselves. The process follows a sequence of events controlled by nuclear genes. First, the chromosomal DNA breaks into fragments, and this is followed by breakdown of the nucleus. The cell then shrinks and breaks up into vesicles that are phagocytosed by macrophages and neighboring cells. While programmed cell death may seem counterproductive at first glance, it plays an important role in maintaining the life and health of organisms during human embryonic development. Apoptosis removes the webbing between the fingers and toes. It is also vital to the development and organization of both the immune and nervous systems.
What is the difference between active dry yeast and compressed fresh yeast?
Both active dry yeast and compressed fresh yeast are leavening agents. Active dry yeast comprises tiny, dehydrated granules of yeast. Although the granules are alive, the yeast cells are dormant due to their lack of moisture. Because the cells are dormant, dry yeast has a long shelf life. Active dry yeast becomes active when mixed with warm liquid. Compressed fresh yeast is moist and extremely perishable. It must be stored under refrigeration and used within 1 to 2 weeks.
Did dinosaurs and humans ever coexist?
No. Dinosaurs first appeared in the Triassic period, about 220 million years ago, and disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, appeared only about 25,000 years ago. Movies that show humans and dinosaurs existing together are only Hollywood fantasies.
How does cyanide affect cells?
Cyanide acts by inhibiting the enzyme cell's need for oxygen utilization. Without these enzymes, a cell cannot produce ATP and will die. People can be accidentally exposed to cyanide. Very small amounts of cyanide naturally occur in some foods and plants. For example, cyanide is present in cigarettes and in the smoke produced by burning plastics. Cyanide is also used to make paper and textiles, clean metals. Separate gold from its ore, and in the chemicals used to develop photographs. Pesticides used in ships and buildings may also contain cyanide.
In what year was the European starling, Sturnus vulgans wingspan, imported into the United States?
Eugene Schieffelin, 1826 to 1906, imported the European starling into the United States in 1890. Schieffelin wanted to establish in the United States every bird found in Shakespeare's works. He also imported English sparrows to New York City in 1860.
How do neurons carry messages?
Imagine a long trail of dominoes running from your finger to the spinal cord in your back. When you touch a hot object, the messages this action produces in neurons is similar to the reaction that would happen if you knocked over the first domino of the set. After the first domino falls, each domino that follows it would be knocked over in turn. This process is similar to what happens between neurons. The message is carried from the fingertip all the way to the spinal cord. Neurons maintain a concentration of sodium and potassium ions, Na and Nk+, respectively. The openings present in membranes allow these ions to pass through. As the sodium and potassium gates open and then close, the electrical charge of the nerve cell changes and messages are transmitted along the neuron membrane.